In the first step of this section, where I have explained all the outside features of a camera lens, I have also explained what aperture is through a comparison with the human eye. As per the Dictionary of Oxford, the common definition of aperture is an opening or a gap. So we consider the entrance hole in the aperture diaphragm as the aperture of the lens. The camera lens aperture looks like this. It is made of several diaphragm blades, so the size of the hole can be modified through a mechanical motor. The aperture is the effective size of the entrance for the light to the camera body or the sensor. And for obvious reasons, the bigger the diameter is, more the light can enter to the camera sensor. The aperture is like a door. If the door is wide open, then more people can enter at once. Now let me ask you a very interesting question. Is controlling the amount of entering light the only job of the aperture hole? No, it is not. Except controlling the amount of entering light, the aperture also controls the depth of field of an image. However, the depth of field is not entirely dependent on the aperture size. Depth of field is also dependent on the focal length. The dependency of depth of field on focal length is a subject of learning that we will cover in the masterclass of photography. For now, we need to understand what is the depth of field in photography, so we can understand the relation of depth of field with the aperture hole properly. Depth of field is the area in an image that is acceptably in focus, or we can also say that the amount of space that is acceptably sharp in a final image is called the DOF, or depth of field of the lens. By controlling the aperture size, we can actually control the depth of field of an image or the lens. The large aperture lenses are capable of providing a shallow depth of field, which might be very useful in different photography subjects, as it can create an additional drama of focusing and defocusing in the composition. However, the deep or wide depth of field also has its significance in photography. In landscape or some other cases where you need to show everything in equal sharpness, large depth of field plays a pivotal role. A lens's f-number can be as large as 1 and as small as f64 or beyond. Oops, I am sorry, I almost forgot to tell you that in photography we use the smaller f-numbers to point out large aperture diameter size. With the increment of f-numbers, the size of the aperture get reduced, and the more you reduce the aperture size, the better depth of field you get in an image, or vice versa. Or you can say the relation of depth of field with the f numbers is inverse. But for obvious reasons, when you wide open the aperture hole, then more light would enter the camera, as I already said. So here the relation of the aperture size with exposure is equal or parallel. Here you can see f numbers printed on the lens mount. As I already told you that this value printed on here is not actually the effective aperture size of the lens. You can calculate the effective aperture size of the lens using this formula. Let's understand this concept with an example. Here we have two different lenses of a same mount. One is 100 mm and another one is 50 mm. Suppose the 100 mm lens has an aperture diameter of 50 mm, then the aperture value would be f2, because n equals to f. F denotes focal length divided by diameter, d. So if you calculate 100 by 50, then the effective aperture ratio would be 2. F is used to denote the value of aperture ratio, and this formula is the standard system of calculating f numbers of a lens. Now similarly, the 50 mm lens has an effective aperture diameter of 25 mm, so it would provide an f ratio of 2 as well. Thereby, both the aperture ratio seems similar, but in reality, they are way different to each other, because here you can see the size difference of both the lens diameters. The lens A would allow almost double amount of light than lens B. So even after having the same f ratio, both the lenses would provide a significant difference in practical photography. Additionally, using the f numbers, you can speculate two other other vital aspects of the camera lens. The first one is whether the functional aperture of the lens is fixed throughout the entire zoom range of the lens or not, and the second one is the maximum aperture size and range of your camera lens is capable of providing. If a lens offers a long range of aperture, then you can consider the lens as a good lens as it provides a significant range of altering the DOF or the depth of field for different photography scenarios. However, to know about the entire F range of a lens, you need to check out the specification chart of a lens, because the lens comes with the maximum F number or numbers printed on the lens only. Using these F numbers, you can get an idea about the nature of the lens. Some lenses can provide a fixed aperture size throughout the lens, whereas some lenses comes with a range. Fixed aperture lenses often come under the expensive lens categories, because maintaining a fixed and wide open aperture in the lens throughout the zoom range is a challenging task, so you might need to pay a lot for this kind of lenses to buy. In the process section, we will understand the concept of aperture further. Sometimes a f4 lens can also beat the performance of a f1.8 lens. For example, if the f4 lens has a bigger effective lens aperture than the f2.8 or f1.8 lens. In the process section, we will understand how to utilize the same formula to calculate the effective aperture diameter of different types of lenses.